set up through this process is that these organisations will have much greater ability to borrow up to 500% of debt to revenue, but that does require that owner councils do provide a contingent liability in relation to that council's debt. So that gives the organisation that ability to plan and invest with confidence in the long term. So financial sustainability, say, is one of the key tests of the new legislation, and really what it's setting out is, can you demonstrate that you're investing the right amount to deliver safe, compliant water services, and can you fund that through revenue and finance? So the three of those work together. What's the investment that's required? What are you going to charge people? How are you going to use debt and finance to balance that as well? And I think there's real, one of the opportunities, whichever model you go down, is there's real opportunities for councils in terms of the new financing arrangements to try and smooth some of the challenges of increases to prices to our communities. We've looked at investment sufficiency across the region, so how much investment is needed, and it's a lot. We've got some major issues with our water networks across the region, and we've tried to use develop a bit of a strategy. So a lot of our modelling to date has been really focused on trying to understand the scale of the problem and how you might respond to that. We think there's firstly a need to kind of keep up with network maintenance. So that's your typical maintenance renewals programs, which really just make sure your network stays in good condition, doesn't go backwards. On top of that, there's a need to catch up. So that's that backlog of worn out infrastructure where we need to replace the worn out bits of the network. Where you've got worn out bits of the network, you start to get issues of it costs more to keep those in place rather than fixing and replacing those. We also need to build up capacity to enable growth pressures across the region. We've got 100,000 odd houses that we're looking to add to the region, so we need to enable the ability to add those to the network, and we need to address some of our compliance issues around wastewater and stormwater. So in total, our modelling indicates that we're looking at in the order of $15 to $17 billion of investment over the next 20 to 25 years across the region. Now, this is based on modelling and a range of assumptions, and we will dig into this a lot more in the next further phase to make sure we've got more robust. So the number might go up or down a bit, but this is directionally where we think the level of investment is going to be needed. In terms of revenue and finance, this is really probably the game changer for the new tools that are before councils. Is the key challenges is that we're starting with a position with most councils where what our public are charged for water services doesn't actually cover all of the costs of providing water services, and as a result the state of the network's gradually declined over time, and we've got a range of compliance issues. We've got all these challenges with the network. So gradually over time we need to increase the revenue for water services, and obviously we've got to do that in a way which is affordable to our communities. So one of the key opportunities here is to look at how you increase prices in a way which is sustainable for our communities, and also you use some of these funding tools through the LGFA and the additional headroom that water organisations potentially have. What will be important with this is the economic regulation, so you need to have trust and confidence that the new organisation is doing this in a fair, transparent and equitable way, and it's really trying to drive efficiency. Every 1 percentage point of efficiency really matters, so driving efficiency is critical going forward. One of the key issues that we've constantly heard from councils is we don't want to pay for their problems. Our problems aren't as bad as theirs, so we want to make sure that our community is not disadvantaged by teaming up with others. So one of the key principles that we're looking to embed is that cost would be based on cost to serve. So if it costs X for Masterton's community to receive water services, you don't pay Y if that's what it costs down the road. So this is one of the key issues that we need to embed in this model and flow into the new organisation. The Water Services Organisation would have to work with the Economic Regulator to develop that water services plan and that pricing and investment plan, so that's a public process. So this will take time to work through. This will be something that kind of is the focus of decisions for the new organisation, and will get embedded over a number of years. And one of the opportunities that new organisation is to use the financing arrangements to try and balance increased costs to our communities with the use of careful debt over time. We think there's a number of benefits of the proposed model. It is well aligned with the government announcements and what we expect to see in Bill 3. and also with the key requirements that Council spelled out about what's important to you. It would keep public ownership through shareholding councils with a clarified and accountability structure so that you're clear on where accountability sits in relation to water. The additional debt headroom and financing arrangements does allow more investment in the network, which would enable some significant catch-up in the network, and we estimate that over a 20-year period you'd be replacing around 44% of the network, and that of course enables new homes, it delivers better resilience, ensures you've got that affordability and financial sustainability. There's potential for this to relieve some of the rates burden and pressures on councils because of that transfer of debt and revenue and assets changes your financial situation, and that's something I'm sure council's looking at very closely. Through the right design of the model, it can provide that strong customer service and local delivery model, and really that long-term approach to funding and investing in water. We've got to be taking the 100-year view on our water networks because that's how long they last. Regardless of which model councils proceed with, the next phases from here really are to move into the development of a full water services delivery plan. And there's really two key components to it. As I say, one is really around that information disclosure to demonstrate how you'll deliver financial sustainability and what's your key delivery model in there. The reality is if councils proceed with a big regional organisation, this is a big process as well, so we're also looking at developing quite a detailed implementation plan which would get into all the more detailed issues around governance and shareholding arrangements, ownership rights, entry-exit points, the operating model, the organisational design, local service delivery model, the strategy and principles around debt and asset transfer, people transition. People have got to be at the core of this process as well. We really need to look after our people through this process, whether they're council staff or Wellington Water staff, the IT requirements and the legal requirements. So it's quite a big, complex change process, which would, we start planning for it in the next phase in order to start delivering it once councils sign off your water services delivery plan. There's a few curly issues to still work through. Councils must consult on the delivery model aspects of your water services plan. You don't have to consult on the whole plan, just kind of your delivery model. So if councils are doing this together, we've got to align a consultation process so we're telling providing consistent information to our communities, which may need to align with council's LTP processes or annual plan processes as well. Stormwater, we still want to dig into a bit more to make sure we're looking at the optimal arrangements for councils and how that fits with the legislative requirements of Bill 3. We're in discussions with the LGFA around financing and how we move from the current state to a future state with this organisation, working with the LGFA around that, and that will consider council debt and revenue and asset transfer, including the timing and the principles and quantum around that. So that's one of the bits of work we're looking at the moment. Bill 3 we're expecting in December. We don't expect that's going to throw out too many curveballs, but obviously we've got to look at Bill 3 and how well aligned our planning is with that, and continue to work with the department in terms of those provisions, and really look at this from a change perspective in terms of our people and councils and Wellington Water as an organisation. So the next steps, as you'll be aware, you need to form a view on what's your optimal approach to your water services plan. You must do a water services plan, but how you approach that and your delivery model is kind of the next directional decision before council. That'll inform your consultation approach in the early new year. We estimate you'll need to be out consulting on that kind of March, April, in order that you can then finalise and adopt your water services plan and then submit that to the Secretary of Local Government by 3rd of September next year. Thank you.
Right, so we're now open for questions. Yes.
Thanks for your presentation, Dougal. I've just got a few questions. Can I do them all at once?
Sure.
Yeah. The first one is, you made a comment that one of the major concerns is about different areas paying for other areas' work or for other areas' debt, and you said that wasn't the case, but I don't quite understand that, because if you've got one entity and you've got 10 different regions or 10 different areas, there's obviously going to be some cross-subsidisation. And also too, it's up to the board to determine the priority of work. So to my mind, that means that smaller partners or less prioritised work will be cross-subsidising urgent work or urgent priorities. Can you just clarify that?
So you're right, those investment decisions will be the remit of the board to make. And we are dealing with some unknowns there. What we're trying to do is put in place some principles around how that pricing would be based moving forward, so that communities can have some comfort that you're not paying for someone else's problems. There are around 200 different ways of charging for water across our region at the moment. So you'll have a range of ways that you charge across your residential and commercial ratepayers as well. The organisation will need to do some degree of harmonisation across pricing, just to make sure that you can't deal with 200 different price points. But we're also proposing that there's a lock-in period for the first 3 years at least, where those differentials don't change. So there will need to be a process over time of harmonisation across prices, and that may be a base price that the organisation perhaps charges, but then reflecting if the cost to provide water in one community is different to another community, the principle that we're trying to embed in this organisation is that would be reflected in price.
So essentially it's an unknown, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. My next question is, we talk about iwi representation, and we've got 10 partners and a lot more iwi. So Wairarapa, for example, has 2 iwi. So what sort of iwi representation will there be, and do you know how that will be split?
So firstly, on the board, the advisory group discussed this and were very clear, and this will be a requirement from the funders as well, that the board is an independent skills-based board, so it's not a representative board, so there will not be an iwi rep on the board. There will not be a Masterton rep on the board. The board will need Treaty Waitangi competencies and skills and understanding. You know, all of the iwi partners need to be really confident that they've got the skills and competencies to be on that board. The question was raised yesterday in South Wairarapa, can councillors be on the board? And DIA confirmed that no, they can't be. So, you know, then it does need to be an independent skills-based board, but it needs to have the right skills that, you know, you're all confident that they understand your needs. So, board, there's no specific, you know, there may be Māori members of the board, but they're not there specifically to represent an iwi group or a hapu group or marae group.
Because that would be a concern for me as well. And my final question, nearly finished. One of the concerns, of course, is, because we're a smaller area, is how loud our voice would be. And I understand that the board's based on competency, and they'll have to look at the region as a whole, or the regional model as a whole, but it's still, I believe, a local concern. How do you think that can be addressed?
Look, it is a fair concern, and I hear the same concern from Wellington City as well. You know, why will an organisation care about us rather than caring about the 9 other councils? So it's a concern that all of the councils have. I think it's one of the things that you'd need to continue to work on in terms of your shareholding agreement, the constitution, your statement of expectations, and then how you work with the organisation around its water services strategy. So, you know, it is one of those things that councils would need to continue to work in terms of the design of the organisation to give you that ongoing assurance.
And just one other thing, I was pleased to hear you say that the bill will come from the water company, because at one stage we were concerned that council would be the middleman, but we... Yeah.
The only caveat I would throw into that is we'll have a transitional process. And so there may be a transitional process where the new entity simply doesn't have the capability to bill, but the intent is that, you know, it is that end-to-end entity. You know, if I'm the water company, I have that direct relationship with you. Yeah. Here's your bill, and I'm providing you your services. If there's a problem, call me. Don't blame the council.
I've written your quote down, so I won't let you get away with that. Thank you.
Your Worship. Dougal, thanks for your report. A couple of things. If with your report, you've got 10 councils in there at the moment. Say 3, 4 withdraw. Do you then go back and propose, have another plan, or how do you work that?
Your Worship, you've hit the nail on the head in terms of one of our challenges. It's really tricky aligning decision making across 10 councils. We certainly seem to have a core intent of councils who intend to proceed at least to the next phase, but councils will make decisions around that over the next few weeks. Most of our councils are making kind of directional decisions, whether they remain in the regional waka or not, from late October through to mid to late November. So by the end of November, we'll have a pretty good idea of how many of the 10 remain in the waka. Should that change significantly, then yes, we'd need to review that position. And I think that'll be quite important before we go to public consultation, because we need to be able to articulate in public consultation, is this 5 councils, 10 councils?
I take it then that the sooner you know where councils sit, the better for you people.
Absolutely. It's very hard to design a water services delivery plan if we don't know who that plan is for.
Yeah. The second question I've got is the peer review of your report from when will we get that? It was mentioned earlier that we haven't got that yet. When will that be available?
So we've got 2 outstanding pieces of work. One piece of work is looking at the debt amount from each council. So we've got a draft of that, and we're currently working on that with CEs and CFOs. So we're hoping that we can get that to you as soon as possible. The second is a peer review of the modelling work, and we don't have a draft of that yet, but we're expecting that next week.
When you say as soon as possible, can you give us 2 weeks?
I would like to give you a firm date. I understand your timelines. We'll do our best.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Just to expand on a point from Councillor Johnson, X versus Y, you're talking about the payment. Now I haven't seen any of that in the documentation to date. Is that something that has just come about because of the feedback you've been hearing from councils and the concerns, which are quite justifiable? I think Wellington has about 63% of the total value of assets. So it would be reasonable for a person in Masterton to think that for every dollar they pay in water rates, that possibly 63 cents of that is going to Wellington. So it sounds incredibly idealistic, but how's it going to work in practical sense?
So what people currently pay for water does range quite a lot across the region. On average, it's around $1,700 per household. But Kapiti, for example, it's around $1,100 per household. From memory, Wellington City's about $1,800. So it does range from council to council, and that reflects what the costs in those communities. So, firstly, for the we've got a price point that what people currently pay through rates and fees and charges. We've also got an indication of what councils intend to charge over the next 3 years through your long-term plans. It gives us a really good starting point. What we're saying is the differentials would be locked in for at least 3 years, and then would use a key principle that if it costs $1,100 to provide water services in Kapiti and $1,800 to provide water services in Wellington, that would be the basis for pricing. And so there is quite a range of ways that pricing does occur across the region, so the organisation would need the ability to do some degree of harmonisation of those. Just to imagine the financial system trying to cope with 200 different price points is very tricky. So a degree of harmonisation is really important, and also as a bigger organisation across multiple communities, there's the ability to deliver benefits. So how do you realise those benefits through pricing as well? So there's a range of things which this organisation will need to work through. At this point, we're really working with principles rather than details, and it's one of those really important issues to really bottom out over the next 6 months.
Just one other question. Sure. You talked about governance and the board and councils having no representation on this board. So, first question is, who's going to appoint this board, and how do our ratepayers have any confidence that that person on that board has got their best interests at heart.
As shareholding owners of the organisation, you would need some form of shareholding committee, and that shareholding committee would need to agree how you appoint board members. Typically, it would be a subgroup of the shareholding committee would appoint the board members, potentially done with the board chair. Similar kind of process to a private organisation. So you would have that appointments process, and again that would be set out in your shareholding agreement and the constitution, which would clarify who's on the shareholding committee and what's the process for appointing board members. So we've got an outline of that in the report, but that's the kind of detail you need to figure out. In terms of appointing board members, you obviously look at key competencies that you need for the board to be successful, and probably look at that as a board as a whole to make sure you've got that range of competencies there. In terms of holding them to account, councils obviously have an oversight role as shareholders and the right to appoint or remove board members. But I think one of the key changes here as well is that regulation. So your role is quite different in this future organisation than even from typical council CCOs, in that the new organisation will have significant oversight from the economic regulator, from Taumata Arawai, and from the regional council to really test and make sure that they're doing their job really well. It's one of the important principles or design principles that we are working with, is the new role of the Commerce Commission and their oversight from a consumer protection and price quality oversight of the new organisation.
Thanks.
So just to clarify, are you saying you haven't received the Castalia report of the peer review of the model?
Yep, that's right.
Okay, thank you.
Brett.
This is such a rough process and so many unknowns, but I can't help but think that Watercare went through this issue 10 years ago, and I'm asking you if there is some report on Watercare, how they went through, putting all those little places and all the variances that would have occurred, which smells a bit like the same thing we're talking about. Surely there's some writing and intelligence on their history that we could get quite quickly and may help us. So that's one question. The other one, which I think I might have sent through to you, is that we all wonder if the other guy's worse than us or better, etc., etc. And our price is cheaper than theirs, and blah blah blah. I do wonder if the figures that every council produces of water flows, water out of the treatment plant and water into the wastewater plant, are not, to me, they're better indicators of a network efficiency than the very dubious asset condition charts, which we all know are notoriously unreliable. Whereas those water flow figures, they're audited. I have vastly more confidence in those, so that, because I look at Masterton's and I think I wouldn't want to advertise it, but ours probably a bit worse than most. And, you read a lot about Wellington having major problems, but when I look at their figures, they're about half the usage and wastage of ours. To me, that's relevant. So that's a request of, I understand you've got all these LTPs and bits and pieces in a computer, and the information's there, but it does my head in trying to pull it out of these other places. I'm asking if you or someone can benchmark that the same as you've done in your index on asset condition comments. to me it should sit in there. So that's, that's probably me.
To answer the first question, I couldn't put my hand on a water care report at this point. That's something maybe DIA can advise on whether or not they're aware of such a. Jaron's nodding, so we'll cover that. We certainly have looked at some of the lessons from water care, though, including in relation to their process that they work through around pricing. In terms of other metrics around condition information and flow figures, certainly that's something which could be looked at moving forward. I don't have that information at this point, though, but yep.
Could you, silly question this, I apologise, could you have that, do you think you could pull that info together in a week, 2 weeks?
I don't think so, sorry, I'm not sure that we'd be able to do that.
Councillor, just to be clear, so the Dougal and the group were given a brief of a plan that they've developed, so any movement into them taking on extra work or doing anything wider than that would be something that the 10 councils would need to agree, because I imagine that would come at an extra cost to the process as well. Thanks.
The 10 scenario costs are quite high compared to the local modelling, and obviously though that's the best scenario because you're working that modelling on all 10 joining. So just to clarify that if that changed, the pricing would increase, obviously. So is that the only modelling you've done?
Sorry, this is the modelling on pricing?
Yeah, the 10 modelling,
Yeah.
You haven't got an alternative?
No. So the modelling that we've done has primarily been done to understand the scale of investment that's required and different kind of options for how you respond to that. That's the main purpose of that modelling. Moving forward, we need to do further work in relation to what that means for how you'd finance that and what that would mean for price.
It's still very difficult to do though, isn't it? Because when you're unsure of who's in bed with who.
Yeah, that's right. So that'll get, really the next level of having more robust information around that would be part of the water services plan, where you have a clearer kind of understanding of the investment that's required and the timing of that, and therefore what that means for price and how you use finance to smooth that as well.
I guess what I'm getting at is that because the modelling is done on all 10 at the moment, this is kind of the best case scenario, isn't it?
Well, I think what we've got in the report is a kind of a high estimate in terms of potential price, because we haven't really looked at the opportunities around financing, what that might mean for smoothing that. I think that applies across all the models. It's an indicative level of information at this point to help councils make a directional decision, but it's not to the point where I'd say it's robust in terms of this is what it will cost people. That's the next phase of work.
With modelling though, it depends on who pulls out of the 10. Like,
I know.
there will be some that are in a really strong position and some that aren't.
Yeah.
So they're not all 10. All 10 aren't exactly the same. So statistically, it would depend on which ones were in. You could end up with a model of 6 that could be fantastic because they could be the strongest 6 and the weakest 4 out. So it just depends on who's in and who's out. Can I ask some questions there?
Of course you can.
Yeah. Just how confident are you in the 10, and just based upon what I just said, is there sort of a tipping point when the regional entity becomes unrealistic? Is there a point in which you think this can't work, and would that model then be given up on?
Look, I can't answer for council's decision-making processes. As I say, you're all working through a similar timeframe and a similar process. What I can say is, in the Wairarapa, you have a number of options before you. Probably a more privileged position than half the country, to be honest, where a lot of councils are kind of wondering how they're going to respond to this alone. Similarly, in Horowhenua and Kapiti, they've got some good in-house delivery models. They're also talking with Palmerston North. They're also talking with each other. So they've got, again, a range of options as well. for the Wellington Water Metropolitan Councils in Greater Wellington, their choices are less broad. It'd be quite challenging for any of those councils to bring water services back in-house. They have some challenges with the current Wellington water model, where it's been in a point for the last, everyone's known for the last 2 or 3 years, we need to move forward to the next model. So they're very strongly motivated to look at a new regional model. So, so I can't predetermine any decisions from councils, but there seems to be a strong motivation and drive for change from at least the metropolitan councils in Greater Wellington.
So just following up, with, say, Honna, you said there's 4 in service, or that was in the report, but only one's truly totally in-house, and it's Honowhenua, isn't it? So would there be, from them, have you got an inclination from them? I mean, to me it seems like it would be less positive for them to join a bigger entity if they've already set themselves up quite recently to be entirely in-house.
Well, Carterton's effectively all in-house as well. But I think all councils are really going to this open-minded.
And another question is, as opposed to wanting the bills completely separate, I find that really frightening, because it's almost like we can blame each other for the cost of the actual households. So the council's going to say, oh, that's not our fault, that's the water entity's fault. And the water entity could be saying, oh no, it's the council's fault, but the actual household is paying more overall costs for what they're currently receiving at the same time. So would the entity actually be working with councils collectively to make sure that you're looking at the overall picture for the households based on what they're currently paying for services? I mean, it reminds me of electricity companies. When the electric bill goes up and you hear the lines company being blamed and the other one being blamed, and then no one's got any idea why you're paying more. So instead of passing the buck, I'd much rather we actually share that responsibility. So is that part of this process at all?
We haven't really looked at that, but you would have to see this organisation that we are proposing does need to be an independent organisation, which is setting its own tariffs, determining its own investment, but it has to do that through a transparent, a fair process with that oversight of the economic regulator. So it's not the council's role to say, why are you charging that? You might want to influence the organisation, but it's really the economic regulator's role to say, is that quality? Is that fair? Is that being done in the most efficient way? Show me why you're charging that amount to those customers.
I just remember the electricity reforms in the 90s and being assured that power would be cheaper, and now look where we are. It would be awful if the same thing happened with water. Just a couple more questions. Are there councils in this model that would be winners and losers, and are you expecting some councils just to join for the greater good at the detriment of their own community?
Look, I think there's benefits for all councils, and if you take the starting point of all councils, they've all got slightly different issues, so whether and slightly different drivers for change. So whether it's a constrained debt headroom, you don't have the ability to borrow to address some of the issues that you've got that applies to many of our councils, poor network condition, growth pressures, limited capacity and capability. There's a whole range of drivers. So I think all councils have got some, opportunities out of this model.
Yeah. And just one more question. And you also mentioned, there's different variety in costs of water across the councils for ratepayers. Is that because, in your view, that some of the costs are unrealistically low? Like councils aren't investing enough money in water, and because they're not investing as much money in water, then the cost to the ratepayers at this particular time are lower than they should actually be.
Our analysis indicates that on average, the true costs of water services, when you look at the cost of supply and maintaining the network and allowing for the other issues like compliance and growth, aren't being fully passed on to ratepayers at the moment. And there's a range of reasons and pressures on local government for that.
So that could be, say, a council's made deliberate choices to invest money elsewhere and not invest in water historically.
I couldn't comment on that. Sorry. You know, this is a process which has kind of built up over decades, though. You know, this is not a new issue.
Thank you. Those are my questions. Thanks, Steve.
We've got Craig and then Joe.
Oh, sorry. Just once again, in all your documentation here, you have a series of graphs that go out 30 plus years, but however in your appendices under limits of information analysis, you say it should be noticed that forecasts almost always turn out incorrect, especially over a 30-year horizon. There is great difficulty in estimating investment requirements over the next 30 years, given poor information on asset condition. So, with that caveat that you've put in about these graphs, can you just explain why you've gone out that distance? Because it appears that some of this information may be no better than throwing a dart at a dartboard.
Part of the reason for going out that distance, I mean, we're dealing with long-term assets, obviously, you know, so we're dealing with 100-year networks, so that should be our, desired horizon. Part of the reason for going out 30 years is it kind of aligns with typical infrastructure strategy type planning, but really getting a better idea. The next 10-year period, councils understand a bit better, particularly because you focus on that through your LTP process, but focusing on 10 years doesn't really give you a picture of what's the actual investment required over the next 30 years. So, for example, Kapiti, they don't have big pressures in the next 10 years, but if you look over the 20 to 30-year period, they've got quite a big wave of renewals that are coming through and stormwater issues that will come forward. So we're trying to take that longer-term view, but it's also recognising that, you know, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone in 30 years' time. So we're just trying to be upfront that modelling, it's directional, it provides an indication, but it's directionally robust, we think, but precisely wrong.
Thank you, Corin. Jacob. The role that you currently play with the work that you do for the regional group, you talked about the shareholding committee would be the ones that would appoint the CCO board. Would your role also include an advisory paper to help guide them, bearing in mind that they were going to be pretty much dictated by legislation for Africa about the way that they've got to do stuff?
Oh, look, your crystal ball gazing there, Joe. You know, I think we've got a little bit of water to go under the bridge before we get to that point, but the process from here, we've got to develop a water services delivery plan, and as part of, in parallel to that, we've got to nail some of those issues like how do you appoint the board and who provides advice around that. At some point, there is a really important inflection point where you go from, councils working together to you go, right, we've actually started to establish this new organisation, so we've actually got appointments, we're actually handing over some of the accountability and decision-making rights. So at some point, basically start appointing staff, people, and then, the board. So the point at which shareholders decide it's appropriate to appoint the board will be a really important consideration as part of the next phase of work. Ideally, you do that earlier as possible so you can start to ensure that those people are driving those right accountabilities and decisions and are owning that, rather than kind of coming in and redoing it. So I guess it's a long way of saying shareholders will need advice, but who that comes from, I'm not sure.
Okay. I was just kind of alluding to maybe principles of local, of local people to, I suppose it's to give comfort to the councils that if they can't have their elected representatives on this board, then at least they have some say in local representation as a principle of appointing the CCO board. My second question is, one of your slides you put up, the regional network condition slide, you said it excluded Wellington and Kapiti. Was that because the LTPs weren't ready at the time, or and if they are ready now to be included, what impact would that have on the budget amount, proposed budget amount of $200 million to catch up on maintenance issues? What impact would that have once you overlay their?
Well, apologies, I might have been a little bit unclear on that. So that what I intended to say around that network slide was that network condition reflects most of the councils in the region. The two councils that have got quite different network condition, it's still included in that graph as part of the average, but Greater Wellington's network condition and Kapiti's network condition are, quite substantially better condition. Everyone else has got, about 20 to 25% of their network is worn out. Generally, generally wastewater's worse for everyone. So most councils are kind of in that boat. But Kapiti, just mainly by dint, it's a lot of newer development, 70s development. Their network's in quite a lot better condition. Greater Wellington, of course, they're dealing with drinking water and large, bulk drinking water. Their network's in pretty good condition as well.
Thanks.
So just to emphasise Councillor Bowyer's comment, it's virtually impossible to do a 30-year forecast, correct? Because the other thing is too, the entity that begins might morph into something else, truly, mightn't it? So you've done 10 modelling, but it could fall to 6, and then in 10 years' time, 2 might want to leave or 3 might want to join, correct? So it's kind of very difficult to predict anything, isn't it?
It is.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
It's a bit like predicting the weather in Wellington.
On a beautiful day, there you can't beat Wellington, though.
But I suppose in defence of the 30-year view is that many consents over 20, 30 years. And if you don't take that long-term view, you might discover at the end of your lovely 10-year picture, oh dear, there's a $64 million wastewater plant. I wish I'd remembered about that. But anyway, I just wondered if I could, if you're the one to ask in the gravel road report, the modelling observations, which sort of shows up the difference between Wairarapa Council's model and the regional model, and it sort of shows that a $750 advantage to the regional model versus the local council model. And even when you come down to a local level, I find it difficult that our water charges are a lot less than South Wairarapa's. Their liability by the debt graphs is much higher than ours per capita. Their incomes are 33% higher on average than Masterton's. I see a problem when I hear about the 3-year lock-in period, but everything I'm hearing is that must merge. Maybe you can argue about 5 or 10 years to merge those prices into one, but we're making a decision for the next 30 years plus, and I want to know where, I'm getting the message that price is going to merge and there is going to be cross-subsidisation and this unknown chaos of whose needs are greatest or less.
Whose voice is louder?
I don't think it is whose voice is louder, because I take comfort, but it's worth asking you that these entities, I would have thought by regulation, will have a baseline of level of service and local delivery. It's in your report, actually. And that, that to me overcomes the worry about one being treated, treated better than the other. Masterton people think they want to be treated, they don't want to subsidise South Wairarapa. It goes, those regulations, I cannot believe will not, and maybe that's a question for DIA, I cannot believe that those sort of basics will be left open. Could you comment on that?
Yeah, and certainly I'm sure Jaron can elaborate as well, but it's certainly one of the principles of economic regulation. I mean, it's called economic regulation, but it's price and quality goes to exactly that of level of service. So the economic regulator will look at the entity and say, what level of service are you providing? How are you charging for that? Is that fair? Is that transparent? Are you doing that in the most efficient way? So it has that role of really driving that consumer protection as well.
Is there anything DA want to add on to that? I know Jared's just left the room, but
We can cover it in our section.
One of the things that interests me in the presentation, Dougal, is you talk about a Bill 3 coming up. Is that, I know you can't crystal ball gaze, but is it likely that Bill 3 will change the perimeters of the brief that maybe you guys and the Wairarapa councils have been given? Is there anything that tells us that there could be something coming that we could change this whole thing?
At this point, we don't believe so, but I'll get Jaron to respond to that issue. Usefully, the department has proactively released all of the policy papers which underpin Bill 3. So, some detail may change, but at this point, the two key things that we're really looking for from Bill 3 is this new water services organisation, which will set its statutory purpose, its role and its powers. The powers are going to be really, really important to make sure that it can do its job well. And also provide more detail around economic regulation. But so we're not expecting anything significant to change. We'll see the bill in 6 weeks or so, and who knows? Maybe DIA will run some webinars on what's in the bill before then. Useful.
do you want to cover that in your section, Jared? Yeah. Tom.
Thanks to for your report, and I'd just like to thank you for the way you explain stuff, because it makes sense to me, so you must be explaining it very well. Just a couple of things to clarify, the XY costing scenario. So what I'm hearing, what I understand from what you're saying is there will be some smoothing across the regions, but there will be personalisation for regions depending on their level of investment needed, their level of debt, Is that correct? So it's a bit of both worlds in that space. So, for example, if Masterton District Council are currently providing water services per connection lower than the rest, we could expect our water fees to be lower than the rest, but maybe not by the same amount of our efficiencies. This question's been asked a couple of times, but if the 10 count, if it doesn't become a regional model with 10 councils, you can't tell us what the impacts will be on price at this point. One of the things we've been asked is, it's a bit of a concern to me, is that the other model, part of their process is to critique your model or evaluate it against their own standards. You're not allowed to do that to their model, so I'm going to go with what's requested, and I'm not going to ask you to do that, but what I'm going to ask you to do, what do you see to be the benefits of the regional model for the Masterton District Council?
Well, going to that benefits slide, I think there are a range of benefits for Masterton.
Could you go back to it?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, just sort of the big picture ones, you know, if you can, maybe even without your slide would be nice.
Yep.
Just to see if you actually know.
Yep. Kind of, if you go back to your base challenges, Masterton, like most other councils, has got some challenges around the level of investment that's required and your ability to fund that. So principally this, whether you go with the regional model or the whited upper model, there's potential to set up a new water organisation which has got, effectively greater ability to borrow to address your water network issues, and therefore a greater ability to smooth cost increases for the community over time. So, that is the game changer, whether you go with a regional model or the provincial model. I think one of the opportunities with the regional model is utility organisations tend to be able to drive greater efficiencies based on scale. So, this does depend on a number of factors, including good governance, good procurement, supply chain management, contract management, skilled staff, good investment decisions. And so every percentage point's going to matter. So we haven't modelled efficiency in terms of our cost estimate. This is going to be a critical focus for the new organisation. How can it do, there's a lot of work that needs to be done, so we've got to do it cheaper. Basically, we've got to do it really efficiently, and that requires really good, staff, really good governance. That requires the investment capability to do the right work at the right time, and it's really those strategic decisions that you make over the long term, which is where you get your massive gains. So the right procurement models, the right decisions around should we renew or rebuild a wastewater treatment plant in its current location, or should we think about something completely different because we've got the financial ability to take a 50-year view rather than being forced to address a short-term compliance issue. And that's the game changer. You can continue to chase issues with the current network and try and drive little efficiencies by addressing the issues that are in your face today, or bigger organisations with more investment capability, with the mandate and accountability to take a long-term view, can actually have that opportunity to go, the 50-year view is we need to invest over this way, and that's really, where you substantially save money. That's the game changer. So I think, both models offer those abilities. A bigger regional entity, as I say, potentially has more ability to manage those costs and issues across a greater regional area.
So that size will allow that level of long-term and strategic planning and smoothing of costs over time. The scale of the entity will enhance that or make that more
We think so, yeah.
cost effective. Any other benefits from the Wellington region that you want to emphasise?
Yeah, I think again, just the scale opportunity in terms of capability capability and capacity to respond as well. When you have an issue, you can redirect resources potentially, and you've got that greater range of skills and experience in a bigger organisation. That is definitely one of the upsides of the Wellington Water Model. There are some challenges with the Wellington Water Model, but it is an organisation with some extremely skilled and competent people around water services. It's the second biggest organisation in New Zealand on that basis.
And just my last question. Some of the critiques or evaluations that I've heard and read made against the regional model, and to use terms that have been used with me. It's a theoretical model, it's a high-level model. It doesn't fully consider operational aspects. It's sort of a cost-only model. Small councils are likely to lose their influence, not iwi-based. The needs across the region differ too much. And I guess, as we heard in Martin Borough, one person say, when you spoke down there was a sales pitch. So I just want to give you an opportunity to respond to those claims.
I'm not quite sure how to respond to those. I think what we've tried to do is design an option for councils to give you some options. We think this is a good option. It's an option at scale, which presents some opportunities. It's an option which would need to be designed to respond to local needs and ensure you have confidence around local service delivery. So there is more work to be done. But I don't see that we've got fundamental issues in terms of any of those issues that you've raised.
Tom, if I can, just for the record too, so the Y Plus team didn't evaluate the model, but they did an assessment.
Well, however you define the terminology, they're very similar words.
They really are.
I can read, if you'd like me to read something from the model, I can do.
That would be helpful, just based on what you said.
You go to Martin and I'll find it. Just
Marama?
Kia ora, Dougal. Thank you for not only your presentation but for sitting here and answering our questions so that we can get better clarity for this decision we have to make. So thank you. My question is probably follows on from Tim's or combined in somehow, but it might not be for you to answer. You might be the wrong person. But it seems to me that the councils have to consult with their people, and they've got to do a lot of work, which is okay. But then when do they get to hand over the responsibility? Like that, everything's got to be at arm's length. They can't have a representative. They can't, well, I suppose they can, but everything is at arm's length, and yet when do they hand over the legal and judicial responsibility to this new organisation?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question. So yes, the next stage, in terms of public consultation, is you must consult on your service delivery options. So a water services plan has a range of information. You don't have to consult on the whole document, but you do have to consult on how are we going to deliver this. Are we going to continue to do it in-house, or going to be part of a provincial model or a regional model? What's your proposal? So you must consult on that. If you then, after consultation, adopt your water services plan, it has an implementation component, and you have to give effect to your water services plan. So there's a requirement on council to put it into effect. So it won't sit on a shelf, it'll be something which has to be delivered. So the water services plan has to outline how you would implement your proposed model. So even if you stick in-house, if you say set up an in-house service delivery team, how are you going to do that? What's the process and the timing for that? It has to be outlined in your plan. Similarly, if you're going to set up some kind of CCO model, your implementation plan has to spell that out. So that's one of the things that we see as being a really important part of the next phase of work, is being very clear on that process, on decision points, on how and when you start to set up a new organisation. When do you form a new legal entity? When does it have a bank account? When do you appoint the first staff member? How do you appoint the interim board? What's their role? What's the process to go from an interim board to an establishment, to a full-time board? At what point are you confident that that is set up in a way that you can say, legally, we're now handing over our assets? At what point do you say we're now transferring our debt or our revenue? So, there's a lot of issues to work through there, and we need to make sure that's really well aligned with the cycle of local government, and potentially that kind of points to some of the points of change happening linked to your LTP process, but ideally you're also getting a new organisation stood up before then. So there's a range of factors, so good questions that we need to work through.
So I really, as well as what you responded with, wanted to know, do we ever get out of the situation where it's their fault, it's our fault? It's clear that we can't blame each other.
Yeah, I think that'd be a really important point to nail, is to be very clear on how you transfer that accountability and what's the day. What day do you go, phones now go through to them, not to us. At what point is it your responsibility to mow the lawns there, or to pay the insurance, or to do the work? Those kind of details are really important to nail. So you can't, and you've got to be working on a win-win situation. You don't want to end up in a situation where there's blame.
But there will come a point.
Undoubtedly.
So we'll go back to Tom, and then we've got Craig, and then we've got Bex.
Yeah, so where my understanding comes from, that I think the Y plus T model has been given opportunity to critique your model. You haven't been paid to critique their model. We're not allowed to ask you to critique the model. I find that strange and unhelpful, but if you haven't been paid for it, fair enough. But if I read this, and the document is littered with statements like this. In the executive summary, our scope of work was clear. It was to develop a Y plus T joint arrangement option, an assessment tool, and evaluate that option against the larger Wellington regional arrangement option comprising 10 councils. And that's what's been done throughout the Y plus T report from my perspective, hence my position.
And can I just, we'll hear from the Y plus T model, and there'll be more opportunity to explore that through that. Thank you, Tom. Craig.
So in our briefings and also in here, there's been a term used, the possibility of network fault runaway. Okay, so I see that as possibly being something of quite a concern, especially in the Wellington region. So taking that on board, is there a possibility that if that happens, these figures that we're talking about could actually get quite horrendous?
Explain what that means.
Network fault runaway. So that's I'll try to, I'm not a general member. So my understanding is that when you get to the stage where you're getting more faults than you can physically get to, and you haven't got the resource to do it, then the ability to continue to patch becomes totally unsustainable, and you're just overwhelmed with faults and you don't have the ability to do any fixing. Kind of correct? Yeah, so that would, if that did possibly happen, that could have a major impact on these figures too, couldn't it?
Oh, certainly. Yesterday I was driving back into town, and there was a water blowout on Vivian Street in town. So we're dealing with networks which have issues, and we're talking about long-term investment to really turn around the state of a network, and that applies to Masterton and applies to Wellington. This is not an overnight solution. We're dealing with quite a delicate water network, which will continue to have challenges for the next 20 years until we really remediate the state of the network. So, it's a risk that the region needs to live with. Resilience issues, climate change issues will impact on the resilience of the network as well. So, this is why we need to use the tools at our hands, including, financing arrangements, to try and up our investment earlier to address some of these issues, so that we do have more resilient networks and we don't have as high a risk of issues like network fault runaway.
So just one point. So if we end up in a 10 council model, when do you think the ratepayer can reasonably expect to see an improvement in the level of service?
Probably goes to Marama's question around when and how you transfer accountability. I think part of any transfer process, it'll need to look a little bit bespoke in each community and work with each local delivery team so that you don't result in any loss of service during this process. I think making sure that people, the community, don't notice the change will be important, and then build from there. I'd say it will take some time. You'll have a process where you're in steady state, and then a change process which will result in some churn, and then you improve from there, and that's the reality. So this is the long-term gain. Communities may not notice an improvement in level of service for some years, but let's aim for at least no loss of service.
Thank you. Bex.
Yeah, hi Dougal. You talk about long-term gain and economies of scale over time, and yet agree it's not possible to accurately forecast the financials long-term. One of our ongoing discussions is the possible amalgamation of Wairopa's 3 councils, and a local water model would flow quite nicely into this. So my question is it possible then that Waireka could adopt a local model, but then if it wanted to, join a larger regional entity at a later date?
So we haven't defined entry and exit points for the organisation, but some councils have started to flag that this will be important to them. So Greater Wellington in particular have said that they've shifted their position a little bit in this journey, and their current position is that they probably would intend to be part of a shareholding ownership of a new model, but would intend to exit that at perhaps 5 years from now, once they were confident that it had the capability to take on the stewardship of its assets. So as part of allowing for an exit of councils, we'd need to define what the entry rights would be as well. Some other councils have discussed exactly this issue and said we'd kind of want to lock in a period, maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years, where we just need the organisation to kind of, get up and running and really start to hit its straps for us as the shareholders before we're willing to open the door to others. So I can't answer your question, but it's definitely an issue that councils are thinking about. Is there a defined point at which you say we aren't going to be able to bring in new councils, or you have a defined point where councils can choose to enter or exit as well?
Because one of the issues is which people talk about is look at all Wellington's water problems, or Porirua, and they're saying, well, do we want our communities to pay for that? Whereas if there's an exit and an entry ramp, some of those problems could be fixed over a 10 to 15 or 20-year period. And we've already established that the entities can morph into different entities. So there's nothing to say that you couldn't adopt a local model initially, and that there could be other opportunities further down the track, is there?
That's right.
Thank you.
So by extension, so that would require getting out of a model and then going into a model. So you could essentially have a standalone model as a council, not have to worry about getting out of one you're already in and join in a bigger one later on. And I think it's important, the people here might be thinking, you said before, and I'm not critiquing you for this, but you said whether or not you choose the Y+T model or the regional model, I think everyone here needs to understand that there's also the viability of a local model, a standalone model, and we're not ignoring that as a council. We're not ignoring it as a council.
It's in the consultation regardless.
Yeah. A lot of work's gone into your model, the Y+T model, and absolutely no work whatsoever has gone into a standalone model. Thank you.
Just for clarity there, Tim, too, so under the legislation, as I understand it, we're required to consult on a model which has some form of combination of councils. We're required to consult. One of the options has to be a combination. Is that correct?
Not quite. You must consult on two options, and one of those options has to be status quo, and then your other option could be a variant of
The
that.
minimum of two.
Yeah.
So one has to be consult.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
I'd just like your opinion on, possibly in response to the previous speaker, on entry-exit points. Do you think it would be easier to initially join the biggest body? You know what's coming. And if you changed your mind and wanted to jump into a little body over the other side of the hill, where you'd be the biggest one, and help them, I would have thought that would be an easy transition. Whereas if you set up a little body over this side of the hill, and your costs, we already know, are quite a lot higher to the individuals, would there not be a little bit of a hard grind to be accepted by a larger body that would say, what's in it for us?
It's a bit like forecasting. I can't give you an accurate answer to that one, sorry.
But also too, the pricing model has shown that the local option is less expensive than the 10 regional option.
No, it's absolutely
to start with, because the forecast, you haven't got a crystal ball.
Neither group's got a crystal ball. I think you've got the figures wrong, Councillor.
You have to make a decision based on the information you've got now.
Greg, can you share that information?
I trust the modelling information put up in the box from Gravel Road showing that for the council model over here, the starting price is, the peak price, is from 2036 to 2050, $5,017 per connection. That's the local model. Now, just remind people that currently Masterton pays $1,400 a connection. The long-term sustainable price for that local council model is $3,305. So again, we're currently paying $1,400. The regional model, peak price, 2036 to 2050, is $4,288, $730 cheaper than the Wairarapa Council model. The long-term sustainable price is $2,622, which is $683 cheaper than the Wairarapa only model. So to me that is a very definite statement that the regional model is cheaper than the local council model. And just as an aside, the local council model says our starting point is $1,909 a connection, which it is if you average us all. But the people that vote me in, that I have a responsibility for, are paying $1,400. So you are talking of a huge jump in price between the local council model and the regional model. And to me, well, I want someone to tell me if I can't read properly, that is very clearly stated. And I hear what everyone says about the massive number of uncertainties in all this, but we have to make a decision based on what we see. And that little model spells it out crystal clear to me, but I don't know, can you comment?
Councillor,
anyone comment? Am I reading it wrong?
It feels like we're getting into some of the discussion that we'd have at the decision-making process.
Yeah, I'm aware of that, but there is a relevance when someone suggests that the price is cheaper for a local one, and I take an expert report from Gravel Road, which says exactly the opposite. Just have a go at it.
The only point I'd kind of really stay again is the modelling that we've done wasn't intended to nail prices. It was focused on understanding the quantum of investment, which doesn't change really whichever model you use. What the different model options then present are ways of how you fund and finance that and how you do the work more efficiently. So really just kind of caution using those pricing figures as any kind of absolute. They're indicative only, and really just kind of reminding you of the purpose of our modelling was understanding investment scenarios, not price pathing. That's the next phase of work to be done from here.
And you will be receiving some information from the DIA soon around the dollars for each individual council as well, which will help in some of that piece.
And it'd be fair to say, Dougal, wouldn't it, that when it comes to pricing, that there's so many assumptions out there at the moment that it's, to quote figures is just like really wasting time.
Just like throwing out a comment about one bit more expensive than
That's
the
right.
others.
Thank you.
Corey, just a question. The detailed information you're talking about, will we receive that by the 30th of October? Because that's the date we're deciding whether the regional model is in or out. At this point, anyway.
To be clear, Councillor, as I said at the start, if it's obvious that there is information still to come pertaining to the regional, or indeed if it was Y plus T, if we are not confident that you have the information to support you in your decision making, and it's available information, we would whole decision-making piece, but with the view that we still need to, in facilitating the process and the needs that the regional group have, we need to relatively quickly have a decision, as do the other councils, on where we're going.
So whose decision, who has decided that the 30th is the date we need to make that decision currently? Is that the...
So that request came through the regional.
Through you guys?
Through the union.
Well, yeah. So
the partnership
and the partnership agreement, when it was set up, that was one of the things that were put in there, I believe.
Well, that evolved, and the latest program was a decision needs to be made by that date so that the regional group understand where they're at.
Is that a direct request from the regional group, that date?
We are trying to design a process whereby we can deliver a water services plan on behalf of the region in the time frames. The sooner we know which councils are part of that plan, the better for that process. Councils are making decisions from around 29th of October through to late November. So Horowhenua, Kapiti will be going to their council later in November. So we've got a range of dates that we're working with, but it's really up to you and your council as to your time frames.
So if we delayed that decision to the point, to the same time we're making decisions on some of the other models, which is probably going to be before November, won't affect you guys too much, because you're getting some in late November anyway. Is that right?
Comment on that? Yeah, I think we should confirm the program potentially after today's session, because there are 3 key pieces of information which are still due. Once we've got those, then we can look at the decision-making dates. But it is in everyone's best interest to move as quickly as possible, because this is only one decision in many, obviously.
Although I would argue it's in people sitting behind us over here, best interest that we have all the information at hand before we make a decision.
Well, that is just what I said, councillor. That is just what I said. Yes, it is. I said those 3 key pieces of information, reports, information, will come through.
It's not a race.
Not a race, councillor, but we do have the timeline of the September date for the and working back with them, ensuring that we've got it. But we will work to make sure that you've got all the information that you need to assist you in your decision-making process.
At appropriate speed based on the information that we have, not a pressured speed to make a decision. That's good to hear.
Brett?
Yes, I was delighted to hear your words, because I confess that I thought it would be bad to have a meeting to accept or eliminate the regional model and then some weeks later have a look at the others. Whereas I'm hopeful that the 2 dates will merge when we have more complete information, and that way both all options will have a fairer crack at it, I like. So thank you for your words. I didn't record them.
Thank you for interpreting my words. So, as we've said, we will make sure that you have those pieces of information for the decision-making process. Decision what that timeline looks like, we're not doing it here today, but as stated, there's those 3 outstanding pieces of work, and we will make sure you have them before you do that decision-making process.
And with that, with those lovely words in mind, there's another little phase I hope is going to happen where the public, who this is sort of the first they've heard about this ginormous thing in detail. I wonder if I can ask you, would you release all these reports reports to the public, like Horror did with Scott's report, will you release to the public the W+T and Greville Road and Townsend and all those reports to the public? And hopefully they have an opportunity to question us at some level before we make a decision. Because they may think of something we mightn't know everything, and they might come up with something that we hadn't thought of.
So all the reports will be made available as part of the council papers being released.
That's the question, because it took me quite a while to read all these. I may be a bit slow, but to release, 260 odd pages of high dense stuff is, I would like to think, and I'd have faith in you, that you could release it maybe, tomorrow or something.
Well, I'm pleased you've got faith in me. That's a good place to start. I won't give you any commitment here, but we'll look at that and come back to you, Councillor.
Just a question to follow up. Why wouldn't it be released now? What would be the reason behind that? So Porirua, you're saying Councillor has that information?
So at this point in time, the Y+T report is still in draft because some of the Tararua information is not in there, and the intention is that once that report is complete, it will be released. And that information will be there for a new decision-making process.
Along with the upcoming reports?
Indeed, they all.
Yeah.
Which was always going to happen anyway.
Anything else for Dougal?
Just have a short break.
Okay, so thank you, Dougal. Thank you for your time, and I know you've had a big couple of days with yesterday and today. So, thank you for that, and obviously all the work that you and the team have done over the past months in terms of putting this together. It's an interesting and complex space, and whether you're doing it with 10 or you're doing it with a single CCO, it's complicated. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Have
mate.
you seen the Y+T report?
We'll take a 15-minute break. Everyone's got the calls.
They try to hold that.
Listen to you, John.